Dadhood. Modern Dadhood podcast.
Hey, dude.
Adam Flaherty.
We're making an episode.
It's about time.
I don't like that feeling.
It happens. I don't much like it myself, but life gets in the way, to paraphrase a great line from a fantastic movie. Paraphrase was the wrong word, probably.
To cite or quote.
To quote wrongly.
To quote your favorite movie, the Flintstones movie starring John Goodman and Rosie O'Donnell.
Two of the finest actors of our time, all generations. Didn't we say we were going to get right down to it in this one?
Yeah, so have at it.
This, friends, is Modern Dadhood, an ongoing conversation about the joys, challenges, and general insanity of being a dad in this moment. My name is Mark Checkett, and I'm a dad to two boys who, as of this recording, will be turning 7 in less than 24 hours. Big day in the Checkett household tomorrow.
So by the time this is being heard by anybody, they'll be
grown men.
They'll have beards. Mm-hmm. And my name's Adam Flaherty, and I am also a dad. And I have two daughters, one who is 11 and one who is about to turn 8. And we just got back from the sweetheart dance. There were some really nice moments, and it was cute. And, we went out to eat afterwards with some friends who were there with their kids. And so it's just a whole thing. Yeah,
that's
nice.
Fun. It's like a whole evening affair. That's great.
For the benefit of our listeners, thanks for listening to Modern Dadhood. We're glad you're here. This is a great episode. If this is your first time listening, we should let you know Mark and I are not experts on parenting, but we love being dads. We love celebrating fatherhood and commiserating about the hard stuff and talking to people who are wiser and cooler than we are about fatherhood so that we can learn from their experiences and that you can learn as well.
Many times they're cooler.
Almost always.
Just about every single time,
I would say.
Today, we might be talking about a topic with our guest that we have not covered at all before.
Which is kind of crazy, right? In 117 episodes, we've not talked about the topic of miscarriage.
Yeah.
Our guest today is Kelly Jean-Philippe, who is a podcaster himself. His podcast is called the Miscarriage Dads. And I had the opportunity to chat with Kelly recently about miscarriage and how the experience of the dad is often overlooked. And it was a really amazing conversation. I think any listeners, dads or moms who have gone through a miscarriage are going to relate to this so deeply. So I'm very excited for our listeners to hear that. We'll play that back shortly.
The topic of miscarriages has, for one reason or another, not come up. Though I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you and I probably both know more than one person who has had to deal with a miscarriage in their life.
For sure. In fact, I think I've told you this, but I haven't shared it on the podcast. We experienced a miscarriage prior to our second daughter being born. And it wasn't a traditional miscarriage. It's what's called a molar pregnancy, which means that what was beginning to grow and which triggered a positive pregnancy test wasn't actually like a fertilized egg. It was just basically the doctor described as like a clump of cells.
Yeah.
It was terrible news and we were devastated, and it was a fairly long road, to getting back to where we could try again. But
can I ask you the time frame between when you first thought we're pregnant to learning about this molar pregnancy?
I don't remember the exact timeline, but I can tell you that it wasn't on our first appointment to the practice that we learned, because from what I recall, at our first appointment, did a test just to, like, again, verify that she was pregnant.
Right.
It wasn't until we got to the phase of doing an ultrasound that the ultrasound tech,
Okay.
knew something was wrong.
Oh man.
And that's a terrible feeling too, right? Because
Yeah.
you can tell when they know that there's something that's not right, and then they have to wait and bring someone else in,
Right.
and then share the news with you, and it was awful. In retrospect, we've thought and talked about this a whole lot, that, now we have our younger daughter who is healthy and thriving and makes our family perfect and complete. And how weird to think about if she wasn't part of our family, it's, I'm not sure that I necessarily subscribe to the idea that like everything happens for a reason.
Sure.
But I can tell you, even though that was a really hard, uncomfortable, emotional thing to go through, I wouldn't want our family to be different than it is.
Right. Right. Looking back on something that in the moment was horrible, gave you I'm sure, a range of feelings and emotions. And I'm sure at moments you probably, one or both of you, or were thinking or even talking about not wanting to go through something like that, for instance, again. And then, flash forward and you look back and you go, well, of course, that's what happened to us, because that's how it happened. And here we are now. And there's no other way that we could have gotten to this point.
Right.
The whole, sure, you could sort of say like, it's all for a reason, or, I don't know. There's kind of some stuff in there, right? That's really hard it's intangible. It's really hard to put your finger on what it means, or describe the feelings around it. But man, I'm sorry that you guys had to go through that. I can't, our path was a little bit different. We didn't deal with a miscarriage at any point. We did IVF. Listeners would probably know that that's the case. And that can be a long road, and the first one didn't take. So there's that whole thing again. It's different, right? It's different than miscarriage. But you look back at stuff like that and you sort of think like, that's our road.
That was our path
had to go down. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I also don't want to downplay or discount everything that Sarah had to go through between learning that what we thought was a healthy pregnancy was not viable, and then getting pregnant again, 6+ months later, because she had to have a procedure to have those cells removed. And then she had to do blood tests for a while. It was on a weekly basis.
Oh, wow.
For basically 6 months until we were kind of cleared to try again. And now we've got baby 2, who's 8 years old.
8 years old. And she's ghosting you at the father-daughter dance.
Exactly. Like looking for the brownies. Mark, I think this is the perfect time to go ahead and play back my conversation with Kelly Jean-Philippe. Kelly Jean-Philippe is a husband and a dad to a 4.5-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. He's a chaplain at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and he hosts the podcast, The Miscarriage Dads. Kelly, I'm so glad to be connecting with you. Thank you so much for making this happen.
Adam, thank you very much for the opportunity to be featured on your podcast, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise. So we usually start by just asking, how's dad life? How's family life treating you?
Dad life has been interesting. Having an almost 5-year-old and a soon-to-be 2-year-old who are both really about to be like 20 and 25 years old, Independence, their vocabulary is a lot more sophisticated. They want to participate in a lot more things. And so all of that just requires so much more energy. And I had to take a large chunk of time off from work just because work and also family life had drained me to the point of burnout. And so this was, I'm in this space now of trying to recoup and replenish while still giving a lot more now that I'm home with the 2 little ones.
Work for you is you're a chaplain. So what does that entail? What does a typical day at work look like for you in the hospital?
So for people who may not be familiar with the language of or the title chaplain, I think the more used word now or phrase now or title is spiritual care provider. So I am trained to provide emotional and spiritual support to people at the hospital, in a hospital setting, whether they have a particular religious or spiritual affiliation or none at all. In terms of what a typical day looks like, I don't think there's any typical days in the hospital. Things can range from providing support to people who have been there for a really long time, but things are kind of stable. And I can leave that room and go to another room where we're talking about possible discharge. I can go to another room and we're talking about redirecting care. I can go to another room and we're talking about this is something that just happened and the family's still in shock and there's still unanswered questions and all of that. And all of that can be in one day, in 1 hour, in a matter of minutes. So it's a lot of giving. If there's anything typical about it, it's a lot of giving of my emotional self, of my full self to people who are facing some of the most devastating circumstances of their lives at times.
It must be just very emotionally, even if it's something that you enjoy doing, just kind of emotionally exhausting to always be giving and supporting in that way.
It is. There's running on E and then there's running on fumes. I don't even know how my motor was still going because I was just completely done.
And so you're no stranger to dealing with and processing very emotional experiences. The inspiration behind your podcast, The Miscarriage Dads, is that you had and your wife had gone through a number of miscarriages yourselves, which are, of course, like just emotionally devastating every time, I'm sure. So would you be open to kind of sharing that story or I guess those stories, and then what led to you starting this podcast and what you're hoping to do with it? What are your goals for the show?
Yeah. So my wife and I, we had a total of, if I remember correctly, 4 or 5 miscarriage losses on our way to the 2 boys who occupy now most of our day and our lives, right? And each and every one of them were different because of what happened either before or what happened after. Nonetheless, all of them devastating in their own right. I want to talk mostly about the first one and the 3rd or 4th one. I can't remember which one it is now, but the fact that, I'm even having to categorize them in that way is its own thing. So going into starting a family, I didn't know that so much went into conceiving and then allowing for a pregnancy to materialize, for life to grow. It was literally, I look back at it now and it's like, what the heck was I even thinking? But the thing is, I didn't have any categories to compare what I expected to, or to even know if any of that was necessary to have as a thought process. Because everyone who I've seen done it before, it was just bang, bang, shebang, and things happened. So going into it, that was the expectation, to the point that my wife and I even put a wager on what gender the baby was going to be, right? Is it going to be a boy? Is it going to be a girl? And those type of things that I now look back on and I'm like, those things are so meaningless and trivial and totally unhelpful from my perspective and because of my experience. So my wife announces that she tells me that she's pregnant. I find out I'm going to be a dad. She gives me this onesie that says, congratulations, you're going to be a dad. Mm-hmm. And dude, I am elated. I scream, I run around the house. I am jumping of excitement. And that's the only thing that occupied my mind from that time forward. We're going to be parents. And then fast forward to when we go to the appointment, they're putting the Doppler, they put the jelly on her belly, the Doppler, and the tech is looking around, and lo and behold, the words that no one ever wants to hear. I'm sorry, but I don't see a heartbeat. So I'm not really sure what I'm feeling. I know I'm supposed to be feeling sad because I'm going to be a dad, and like if there's no heartbeat, then there's no heartbeat. There's no baby that's growing anymore. So I'm still in this muddled space of trying to figure out what is really going on here and what am I responding to, or how can I respond to, and obviously looking at my wife, and she's devastated. And then we talked to the doctor, and the doctor says, seeing how just completely despondent we were, the doctor goes on to say, this happens very frequently, and you shouldn't be surprised that the first pregnancy doesn't stick. Mm. Those exact words. So we leave the office, and the drive back home is very silent. I mean, she's not saying anything. I'm not saying anything. Again, I'm still not sure what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, but I know whatever it is, it's not a happy feeling. There's no joy there. I just don't know what it is yet. And we come home, and my wife just goes upstairs and she lays in bed, and she just goes into her cocoon. And I'm left just trying to figure out, okay, so where do we go from here? Like, what the hell does this all mean to begin with? So the days go by, and she's not really telling me anything. And I want to have the conversation with her because I'm an external processor, right? I mean, I have to. That's by trade, like that's what I do. So I want to process externally. I want her to tell me what she's feeling, and I want to support her, but she's not saying anything to me because she's the exact opposite. She's an internal processor. And it takes her a really long time to work through the things that she needs to work through before she starts saying anything to me. And at one point, just getting ready to go to work, like several days or maybe like a week or so later, I just couldn't tolerate the lack of conversation about what had happened. And I just blew up on my wife. And I was like, you are being insensitive. I grew up in a household where my parents didn't do much talking, and they always gave themselves the silent treatment. And now you're doing this, and I don't want this for my family. And how come you're not doing this? And how come you're not doing that? And then she just turned and looked at me, and I'll never forget that look on her face. And she just shredded me to pieces because I was not capable of acknowledging that she just needed to go through this process. But again, I didn't know how to do that. So on the one hand, I should have thought from my professional standpoint, okay, what would someone who you meet in the hospital who's gone through this and, you're talking to them, like, what would they need? But obviously that was not what was going on in my mind because this is my wife, right? And this is the person who I expect to be able to have these type of conversations with, especially since we've never gone through anything like this, but the expectation is still the same. Like, you can talk to me about anything. I can talk to you about anything. Those are the type of things that we say to each other when we're courting and dating and what have you. But now here we are in this moment, and going through it was just a totally different beast, just a totally different ball game. So that first experience taught me many lessons, but the most crucial one was the value of communication between a couple, to communicate so clearly what your needs are to your partner and for your partner to do the same for you, and understanding that what they might ask of you might be very uncomfortable for you to deal with, but that's what they need. And for you to do the same thing, regardless of how uncomfortable that makes them feel, because that's what you need too. And the second thing that it taught me was that all of these things that I was feeling, I was justified in feeling it because that was my baby too. initially, all of the attention was so much on my wife, and for good reasons, especially the medical attention. And we hadn't told anyone that we were expecting. So I was dealing with this on my own. And here's the only other person who I have, who I now cannot talk to. So all of that is a very difficult thing to process, and it can be like that for other people. But those two things are, I think, the two things that I would want to highlight. The importance of clear communication, especially for the man to clearly express what he needs, which is the first thing. And the second thing is for the man to not minimize what he's feeling, how he's feeling, his response to the loss, just because he's not the physical carrier of the baby.
Man, there's so much there. Thank you for sharing that story. That was really a really powerful story. And, you know, in having done so many interviews for this podcast, you know, one thing that just comes up so much is the idea that men are so much less likely to be vulnerable and to be willing to communicate their feelings and what they need and what kind of support would be helpful to them. And what you're doing with your podcast and sharing your story is really serving to kind of normalize that conversation. And it's so important. So thank you for that. You know, you were saying it's easy to understand why, as a society, we kind of rush to comfort and support women who've gone through a miscarriage because they have such a different physical relationship with the person who's growing inside of them, right? But you see that, I'm just going to quote this, that dads' experiences of loss and grief are often overlooked, undermined, and outright invalidated. And I think that the overlooked and undermined is like really easy to understand, but I'm interested in outright invalidated. Like what does that mean? Can you give me some examples of a father's experience of grief during a miscarriage can be just invalidated?
So after that first miscarriage, my wife needed to get a DNC procedure, and we went to the clinic to get that done. And I'm in the room with her, and it's a really tiny room. She's sitting on the chair, and I'm sitting at on a stool at an opposite angle from where she's at. But again, the room is so small that I could just reach my hand over and put it on her lap or put on her leg or something. So we're not talking about a big room here. So I'm with my wife, and she's distraught, right? And after she shredded me to pieces, I now have a sense of how devastating this is to her. And because it hurts her, it's hurting me too. One of the physicians comes in, and he sits right in front of my wife, and his back is to me the entire time. And so the other person who he walked in with is standing at the door, and she is looking at me, and she's able to look at my wife. This other physician is staring at my wife and speaking to her, and I am behind him. Mm-hmm. And when he first walks in, he asked my wife, you know, who I am in relation to her. And she said, "That's my husband." So when he sits and he gives me his back, at no point during the, 5 minutes or so that he was talking to her, did he ever turn around to acknowledge, to look at me, to even pretend that I was in the room. And he finished talking to the patient, rightfully so, and he gets up and he walks out. To him, that husband was not there. I might as well have been a painting on the wall. The only saving grace at that moment was that woman who stood at the door. And maybe this was just me reading or projecting what I needed in that moment on her. But the look on her face, it's almost as if we had this silent conversation where she was saying, "I am so sorry you're here." And I felt that from the softness in her eyes when she looked at me. And then she walked out as well after he walked out. My wife noticed it, that this guy didn't even acknowledge my presence in the room. If he didn't acknowledge my presence there, that means that he doesn't think that I have any connection to what's going on here. This guy, he'll be all right. You know, he's a man. We're men, for crying out loud. We're men. So we'll get over it. We'll be okay. I hope he does a good job supporting his wife. Again, I don't know what was going on in his mind. It could also very well have been, Adam, that he's gone through this so much that he's just become he has to become callous so that he can do his job, right? Like, it could be all of those things. But even to that point, I would say, my guy, you chose this profession.
Right.
My wife and I did not choose to have a miscarriage.
Right.
So, you know, that's what it is.
Maybe time to retire or find another line of work.
Yeah.
And you've been hosting your podcast for a while now. In all the conversations you've had, are you finding did you and your wife get really unlucky with the providers who are treating you like this, or is that just the norm?
So I think it was that isolated experience with this provider. But I took that and I wanted to see if there were any other dads who had similar experiences, whether with medical providers or just in the broader context of people that they come in contact with, people in their family relationships and what have you. And there has been a handful who are like, yeah, you know, I went through this, and it was obviously all about supporting my wife, or my girlfriend. And yeah, no one really asked me how I was doing. No one really asked me what I was feeling. So that issue of the father being isolated and being left out of some form of meaningful, you know, connection and empathy, someone having the curiosity to even ask him how he's feeling and how he's doing, I think that's something that permeates the culture through and through. So these are the things that at various points were going through my mind. And I know that I can't be the only guy on planet Earth who've entertained those questions, those feelings, that fear of saying in that space and in those moments, hey, I'm here too.
Right. To your point about calling attention to yourself, the idea that it's taking away anything from your partner, who clearly is having her own experience, which in certain ways is going to be different, unique, maybe more intense in some ways than your experience. I mean, I think fatherhood in general, we can talk about that, you know, because even in all the conversations that we have here with dads of all walks of life, we're celebrating fatherhood, but at the same time, not devaluing or trying to take attention away from the important role that the mother plays in this whole amazing, beautiful thing.
100%.
So it's tricky to walk that fine line. And I would imagine it becomes even more challenging when you're talking about going through something like the grief of a miscarriage.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? I think where this whole conversation derails, which happens to be, in my opinion, where the conversation begins, or at least the paradigm that frames the conversation, is that if the father says he is also in need of the same things that are available for the mom, how could he need those things? His body was not the one who carried life in it, right? So he didn't have that physiological connection to this life. The emotional connection that the mom has on top of the physical connection, like that's a thing. And she's expected to have that physical connection. So to say that as a father, as a man, I also have an emotional connection to my child. And then because of that law saying, hey, I am in need of support too, it's almost like saying, well, your experience is not the same as hers, so why would you need that support?
Right.
And I think that's where the whole thing just falls apart from the gate. If we get to a point of realizing that this man is as responsible for this life as this woman is, and to not punish the man for life, biology, the creator, the Big Bang, whatever you subscribe to say that the woman is the carrier of life and the man is not, right? Like, don't punish the man for that, but acknowledge that the experiences are different, but it doesn't mean that one is more valuable than the other. It's such a big miss that the man who she's going to go home with is so under-equipped that he is now going to become not an asset, but most likely a liability to her recovery, right? And to her support. So why not support him as well, right? Empower him with tools for his own benefit so that with a full tank, he can now support her and pour into her in healthier ways. And I think that's just one of the biggest misses in the way that this whole thing is thought about and framed.
You and your wife experienced 4 more miscarriages after that first one. How did the experience change or evolve, or was it just as difficult every time?
In the beginning, I said I wanted to talk about 2 of them, so allow me to talk about the second one.
Please.
So we finally welcomed our first boy in May of 2020, right in the middle of a pandemic, nonetheless. And then we decided that we wanted to try again. And we went on to have another 2. One of these following 2 miscarriages, you hear the words again, I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat. It's as devastating. It's even more devastating every time you hear it. It's both devastating and soul numbing. Like, it's still impactful. The impact is felt a little less hearing it in the moment. The reverb of that impact hurts even more afterwards. So again, she has to go through this procedure of the DNC,
Which is an awful procedure for
it's
anybody to have to go through.
Awful procedure. My wife described to me what she felt like afterwards, and not being able to sustain life inside of a woman. I would never know. It is so destructive, the thoughts that fill their mind, because it ties so intricately to how they see themselves, their identity as women. I mean, it is just, it's horrible from what's been described to me. So my wife is dealing with all of that. And in terms of how I've learned to support her at that point, I am so much better. I'm giving her the space that she needs. We're communicating more. She's including me more in her thought process. So we're growing in that sense, which is amazing. But the fact that we even have to grow in that sense, because of these circumstances is devastating.
Yeah.
So one morning, our boy now is, how old was Juki? Juki was probably a little over a year or so. And we're getting ready to take him to my in-laws and head to work, because my wife already had scheduled a date for the procedure. And I am upstairs in our bedroom, and she is downstairs on the main floor. And she just screams out my name. I fly down the stairs and I find her in the bathroom in the most excruciating pain that I've ever seen my wife in, since. And I just froze. I mean, I was paralyzed, Adam. I just went into action mode. Okay, so what's happening here? Like, let's assess the situation. She's here. Our son is upstairs. Again, no one knows that we're expecting. So it's not like I could call my father-in-law who lives 10 minutes away to be like, hey, can you just come pick up Juki because this thing is happening and I need to be here with my wife? Nobody knows.
Right.
So this is just a Jean-Phillipe household thing. So I had to make a decision. I don't want my son to hear his mom crying out in pain like that. And I wouldn't be able to shield him. And quite honestly, I don't want to be with him right now. I want to be with my wife. That means I have to leave my wife, take our son to her parents, and then come back to be able to be with her. And that's what I did. One of the most difficult decisions in my life. So when I come back and she's still writhing in pain on the floor of our bathroom, and I felt so powerless. I felt so useless in that moment. You can envision the scene. It was just a horrible scene. And she's literally on the floor. And so I get on the floor next to her and we both just start crying together. And then she asked me to get something in an adjacent room, a fan, and I got the fan and I plugged it in and I was ventilating her. And then when she felt okay, she got up. She said she was going to take a shower. She wanted to come back down and clean the bathroom floor. I told her, you don't need to do any of that. Just go upstairs, clean yourself, get some rest. I'll take care of it. So I helped her up the steps. She got in the bathroom. She showered. She laid in bed. I came back downstairs and it was just me and the scene of where all of this happened. Our baby passed right there in our home, in the bathroom, flushed down the toilet.
God, I'm so sorry.
That was probably the worst experience because of the visual and just because of here is this life that we both came together willingly, joyfully, expectantly trying to bring into reality. And the conclusion of it was flush down the toilet. How do you even begin to wrap your mind around that?
I mean, the symbolism of that alone is jarring and traumatic.
Yes. Yeah. So that left the biggest imprint on me. And that was really what, along with everything, but that just sort of encapsulated all of the experiences. And it just made me want to do something about it, which is how the podcast came to be. And inviting me to really then sit in my own experience and just try to find out all of the different components to then have some kind of avenue to talk about, okay, so why do we think as men that behaving one certain way or responding a certain way is more beneficial than another way? Just understanding why you want to do something more than the other, to me, is more valuable of an exploration.
Do you ever think about your two boys now and how your younger son may not have existed had any of the miscarriages not been miscarriages? You know, do you think about that? And
Yeah.
I guess is there this mindset of we had to experience those things in order to have the beautiful family that we have now? And how do you rationalize that?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. That was perhaps one of the questions that was driving me insane during the course of this whole journey of creating a family, especially after having our firstborn and wanting to have a second one. I got to a moment, a time when I was thinking about, why is it that I want to have another child, especially after one miscarriage that I talked about, the very traumatic one, and then the second one after that, which would have been our fourth one. And it was that pressing question, like, why, what is it that I'm chasing after? Why is it that I'm not satisfied with my son? And yeah, that's a question that every once in a while I still entertain. did we have to go through all of these things to get to Julius Camillo, who's my oldest one, and Eden, who's the youngest one? I have no idea. I'm not of the mindset that these things were necessary to happen in order to get to our two children. To me, there's something deeply disturbing about that train of thought for me. I am thankful that throughout the trajectory of our trying to become parents, we were resilient enough to endure what we endured. And it feels like the payoff was, here are two incredibly dynamic and beautiful little boys. My wife and I, every once in a while, we think about what would have happened if we had decided that after Juki, we just were going to stop, which is a decision that we made, actually. But then we went back on that choice. We tried again, and then we kind of left it open-ended. And then, boom, here comes Eden, and he was the exact thing that our family needed. So, yeah, that's it. It's a fascinating question. I don't know where I want to land on that question, but I know that I wouldn't frame it for me in terms of these things had to happen. It's unfortunate that they happened, but while they were happening, we were also blessed with two incredible, incredible human beings.
Kelly, thank you so much for sharing so openly about your family's story and for doing the important work that you're doing with your podcast. I would encourage dads and moms listening to subscribe to the Miscarriage Dads and wherever podcasts can be found. I know that they can find you on Instagram at the Miscarriage Dad. We'll include links to this in the show notes. Is there anywhere else that people can find you and follow along with what you're doing?
Those will be the places that I would encourage people to start off at. So yeah, that's great.
This has been amazing. I feel like we could talk for hours. Maybe we could have you back on in the future when Mark can join us and have continue the fruitful conversation. But man, thank you so much. This has been amazing, and I'm so glad to know you now.
It's been an honor, Adam. Thank you very much.
Mark Andrew.
Guys, it's my mom. Guys, put the Camel unfiltered cigarettes away. It's my mom.
I want to do a segment called Kisses and Disses.
One of my faves.
Kisses and disses. Disses are bad. Kisses are good. You can hear both in Modern Dadhood.
Do you want to explain to the listeners how it goes?
Yeah, I can do that. So in this segment, we read through some reviews of the show that folks have left. And so that we don't get too inflated or feeling too good about ourselves by cherry picking only good reviews, to balance things, what we're going to do is pick one good review. We'll read that aloud for all to hear. But then we're going to read a negative review to bring us a little bit back down to reality, to ground us a little bit, and just generally to keep the universe in check.
So I've selected a positive review, 5-star review from Apple Podcasts. And would you like to read that one?
I can do that. Let me get my reading glasses on. Okay. I have the 5-star very positive review in front of me. This is from user Dogs Are Great Therapy. Totally agree.
I mean, yeah, how can you disagree with that?
Here's what Dogs Are Great Therapy has to say. Hits all the right notes is the title. Modern Dadhood hits all the right notes for anyone navigating the joyful chaos of fatherhood today. What a great phrase, joyful chaos. What sets this podcast apart is the warmth and camaraderie of the hosts, whose genuine banter feels like catching up with old friends. They tackle the realities of being a dad in today's world with humor, insight, and infectious positivity.
Wow.
Honestly, got a little choked up towards the end of it.
Infectious positivity.
If they only knew what total assholes we actually were. especially towards one another.
Dogs are great therapy. Thank you for those kind words. Now I'd like to draw our collective attention to what we call the diss part of Kisses and Disses. And this is a review from somebody named Nap King Cole.
That's really good.
And the negative review goes something like this.
Oh, brace yourself. Okay.
Thought this would be a chill dad hangout. Turns out it's just guilt in podcast form. Modern Dadhood has me questioning my parenting, my life choices, and every decision I've ever made. 0 stars if I could. 1 star. 1 star, but only because Apple Podcasts doesn't allow 0 stars.
They force you to choose at least a star.
Well, Nap, I mean, sorry.
I guess sorry about sending you down an awful path.
Questioning everything, every decision they've ever made.
That's much bigger than than this podcast. We really affected that person, which, I mean, I think we're setting out to do a little bit, just maybe not quite so negatively.
Look, any impact is impact, right?
Yeah, sorry, Nap. Thanks for writing in, though,
And that's a great point. Listeners, we would love for you to leave us a review on Apple. And, whether it's a good one or a scathing one, it may end up in a future Kisses and Disses segment.
I would skew towards positive.
Please, we need this.
Yeah.
Modern Dadhood cannot in good conscience guarantee the authenticity of negative reviews read aloud in the Kisses and Disses segment.
All right, man. That's the end of the episode.
We made it.
Dads and moms, thank you so much for listening, for spending time with us, for hanging out. We would love for you to check out our back catalog of episodes. They are all available at moderndadhood.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, Hark Audio, wherever you listen. And we would love for you to subscribe and like we said a moment ago, leave a review. But most importantly, it would help us out so much if you just told a friend about the show or just shared this episode with them. Text them this episode, word of mouth or SMS texting, is that what you call it? Goes such a long way for us.
What are you talking about?
All right, you take it from here, Mark.
I'm not gonna lie. I stopped listening for a second. You know what I was doing though? In all honesty, I was. You said look at the back catalog, and I went to go look at the back catalog to suggest a great point for any new listeners to sort of jump in.
What were you going to suggest?
I just stumbled upon, we had a fantastic interview with comedian, writer, actor, all-around brilliant guy, Michael Ian Black. It was such a rich conversation. It ended up being 2 episodes long. I think it's a great place to jump in if you really do feel like kind of going back and seeing a little bit more about what this show is all about. Now, where were we in the outro?
Oh, I was about to say, find us on all the social media. I'm not going to list them all, but we're there.
You know them.
Search Modern Dadhood, or you can email us at hey@moderndadhood.com. You can also find our brand new trailer on our website, which
you're going to like it.
I'm psyched about it. We're 5 years in and just finally got around to making a real trailer. So check it out.
Timing is everything, they say. How about some thanks? Should we say thanks to Casper Baby Pants and Spencer Albee for the music that you hear on the show Modern Dadhood?
Kelly Jean-Philippe would get a big thank you.
Gets a big thank you. I'm going to go ahead and say thanks to you, man, for always being a good friend to me.
Well, you know what? Thanks to you. Happy Valentine's Day to all.
Yeah.
And Mark, the last thank you is almost always yours. So why don't you have at it?
Finally, thank you for listening.
Podcast. Just a modern.